Space is not empty. This is the first error, the foundational misreading. Every model of the cosmos that begins with the assumption of a passive void has already failed. Space is not a container. It is not a stage. It is not a neutral medium through which matter moves and light travels and time passes. Space is an active, mechanical system. It has energy, it has density, it has behavior. And that behavior, measured across billions of years with increasing precision, is acceleration. The universe is expanding. This is not metaphor. This is not philosophical shorthand for the dispersal of matter. The fabric of space-time itself, the substrate upon which all physical law is written, is stretching. Galaxies recede from one another not because they are moving through space in the conventional sense, but because the space between them is being manufactured. Distance is being created, continuously, automatically, without consent from anything inside it. For most of the 20th century, physicists assumed this expansion would slow. Gravity, after all, is a long-range attractive force. The collective gravitational pull of all matter in the universe should, in theory, act as a brake. The question was not whether expansion would stop, but when. Would it halt and reverse, collapsing everything back into a singularity, the Big Crunch? Or would it slow asymptotically, coasting toward a cold and static eternity? These were the two models. Both assumed deceleration. Both were wrong. In 1998, two independent research teams studying Type 1a supernovae, standard candles, objects of known intrinsic brightness used to measure cosmic distances, discovered that the expansion of the universe is not slowing. It is accelerating. The universe is not coasting, it is being pushed. Something is driving the expansion faster. Something with negative pressure. Something that fills all of space uniformly, that does not dilute as the universe grows, that acts against gravity at the largest scales. This something was given a name: dark energy. Dark energy currently accounts for approximately 68% of the total energy content of the universe. It is the dominant component of everything. And yet, it is completely undetected by any instrument that has ever been built. It does not emit light, it does not absorb light, it does not interact with matter in any conventionally measurable way. Its existence is inferred entirely from its gravitational effect, or more precisely, from its anti-gravitational effect. We know it is there because the universe is doing something it should not be doing. The universe is speeding up, and dark energy is the only variable in the equation that makes the numbers work. In its most conservative form, modeled as a cosmological constant, a fixed property of space itself, dark energy is stable. Its density does not change. Space expands, but the energy density of dark energy remains constant, simply because it is a property of space, not of the matter or radiation within it. Under this model, expansion accelerates, but at a manageable rate. Galaxies drift apart. The universe grows cold and diffuse. Stars exhaust their fuel. Black holes evaporate. Eventually, on timescales of 10 to the power of 100 years and beyond, the universe reaches a state of maximum entropy. Heat death. A cold, dark, uniform void. This is already a terminal diagnosis, but it is a slow one, a quiet one. It allows for the long diminishment of structure rather than its violent destruction. The question that changes everything is this: what if dark energy is not constant? What if its density is not fixed? What if, as space expands, the energy density of the dark energy component does not remain stable, but instead increases? What if the more space there is, the more of this energy there is per unit volume, not less, as all conventional matter and radiation behave, but more? This is not a trivial variation. This is a categorically different physical regime, and it has name. It is called phantom energy. And if it exists, the universe does not die quietly. It is executed. The equation of state of dark energy is expressed as a dimensionless parameter, W. This parameter describes the ratio of pressure to energy density. For ordinary matter, W equals 0. For radiation, W equals 1/3. For the cosmological constant, the stable form of dark energy, W equals -1. This is already strange. A negative pressure, a repulsive contribution to the energy budget of the universe. But -1 is manageable. -1 is the boundary condition. It produces accelerated expansion, but expansion that remains finite at any given moment in time. Phantom energy is defined as any form of dark energy for which W is less than -1, not equal to, less than. This is the threshold below which the mathematics of cosmology undergoes a fundamental transformation in character. Below -1, the expansion rate of the universe does not simply accelerate, it super-accelerates. And critically, it does not merely approach infinity asymptotically over infinite time. It reaches infinity at a finite, calculable moment in the future. This moment has a name. It is called the Big Rip. The Friedmann equations, the governing equations of cosmological expansion derived from general relativity, when fed a phantom energy component with W less than -1, produce a scale factor that diverges to infinity at a finite time. The scale factor is the mathematical quantity that describes how large the universe is relative to some reference size. When the scale factor reaches infinity, every distance in the universe simultaneously becomes infinite. Every point in space is infinitely far from every other point. The universe does not expand to a large size. It expands beyond any finite size, in finite time. Current observational constraints do not rule out phantom energy. The measured value of W is consistent with -1, but the error bars permit values below it. The difference between W equals -1.0 and W equals -1.05 is, cosmologically, the difference between a long cold death and a scheduled execution. That difference is currently within measurement uncertainty. If phantom energy governs the universe, the timeline to the Big Rip can be estimated. For a value of W near -1.5, cosmological models place the terminal event approximately 20 billion years from now. For W closer to -1.1, the timeline extends toward 50 billion years. The precise number is a function of the equation of state parameter and the current expansion rate. But the structure of the timeline, the sequence of destruction, is consistent across all phantom energy scenarios. The order in which the universe is dismantled does not change, only the rate. What changes as the Big Rip approaches is the effective repulsive force per unit volume, the phantom pressure that counteracts gravity, electromagnetism, and ultimately, the strong nuclear force. This pressure scales with the expansion rate, and the expansion rate accelerates without limit. This means that every gravitationally bound system, every electromagnetically bound system, every nuclear-bound system in the universe will eventually encounter a moment when the expansion of space at its own physical scale exceeds the binding force holding it together. Not gradually, sequentially, in a precise order determined by the relative strength of the forces and the scales at which they operate, from the largest structures first down to the smallest, in a cascade of disintegration that ends at the subatomic level approximately 10 to the power of -19 seconds before the terminal singularity. The universe is not destroyed all at once, it is disassembled systematically, the largest structures first. Gravity, the weakest force, fails first, then electromagnetism, then the strong nuclear force. Each event is a separate event. Each event has a scheduled time. The Big Rip is not an explosion. It is a forensic sequence. 60 million years before the terminal singularity, the first stage of the destruction sequence initiates. At this point, the expansion rate of the universe has accelerated to a value sufficient to overcome the gravitational binding energy of galaxy clusters and individual galaxies. Gravity, at the scale of hundreds of thousands of light-years, is no longer strong enough to maintain coherent structure against the phantom pressure pushing space apart. The Milky Way does not explode. Explosions require a central force, an energy release, a shock wave. There is none of that here. The Milky Way dissolves. The gravitational potential that holds 400 billion stars in a coherent disk structure is simply overwhelmed by the expanding substrate beneath them. Stars that were bound to the galactic center, that had been orbiting it for billions of years, that had survived supernovae, stellar collisions, the passage of the galaxy through dense molecular clouds, are pulled away, not by a force acting on them from outside, but by the expansion of the space between them and every other star. Their orbital paths, which had been closed ellipses, are stretched open. The closure condition fails. The orbit becomes a spiral outward, and then a straight line. The Andromeda Galaxy, currently on a collision course with the Milky Way, expected under non-phantom scenarios to merge with it in approximately 4 billion years, is irrelevant at this point. The merger would have occurred long before. But at T-minus 60 million years, even the merged remnant of the local group loses coherence. The stars of what was once two spiraling, gravitationally interacting galaxies drift away from each other without any possibility of return. There is no drama in this, no shockwave, no brightening, no observable event. From any single star's perspective, if a perspective could be constructed, the other stars simply recede faster than they should. The light from neighboring stars redshifts, the angular diameter of the galactic disk shrinks, and then, over the span of millions of years, the sky becomes dark. The local stellar neighborhood empties. The surrounding stars are not destroyed, they still exist. They are simply beyond any causal contact. The expansion of space between them and the observer now exceeds the speed of light, not because anything travels faster than light, but because the space itself is growing faster. Their light will never arrive. They are as causally isolated as if they had never existed. This is not death. This is isolation. Absolute, permanent, irreversible isolation. Every star in the universe, in the 60 million years approaching the Big Rip, becomes a universe unto itself, alone, unable to receive any signal from any other stellar remnant, unable to send any. The gravitational orchestra of the cosmos, billions of years of interactions, orbits, mergers, accretion, the entire history of large-scale structure formation ends in silence, not with a collapse, with a dispersal. The cage expands until the bars are infinitely far apart, and then the concept of a cage ceases to apply. The cascade continues. The timeline accelerates. From the dispersal of galaxies to the destruction of solar systems is a journey from the scale of hundreds of thousands of light-years down to the scale of tens of astronomical units. The physics are identical. The force being overwhelmed changes only in its strength. 3 months before the terminal singularity, the phantom expansion achieves sufficient local intensity to overcome the gravitational binding energy of individual planetary systems. The Sun's gravitational dominance, the force that has kept 8 planets in stable orbits for 4.5 billion years, is neutralized. At this point in the timeline, the Sun still exists. It may or may not still be fusing hydrogen, depending on where in its stellar evolution it sits at the time of the Big Rip. But for the purposes of the destruction sequence, it is irrelevant whether the Sun is a main sequence star or a white dwarf. Its gravitational field exists, and it fails. Earth's orbital path around the Sun is a nearly circular ellipse, maintained by the balance between the Sun's gravitational pull inward and Earth's tangential velocity. This balance is extraordinarily stable over long timescales, but it is not invulnerable to an increase in the expansion rate of space. When the phantom pressure at the scale of 1 astronomical unit, approximately 150 million kilometers, exceeds the gravitational force of the Sun acting at that distance, the orbital closure condition fails. Earth is no longer in a closed orbit. It is in an open trajectory. It departs. There is no explosion, no solar flare, no gravitational wave. Earth simply stops returning. Its path, which had been an ellipse, opens into a hyperbola and then into something approaching a straight line. The planet accelerates outward, not because any force is pushing it, but because the space between it and the Sun is growing faster than the gravitational potential can compensate for. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the gas giants, all of them within the span of these final 3 months are stripped from their orbits sequentially. The outer planets first, where the Sun's gravity is weakest, then the inner planets. Each departure is silent. Each trajectory is straight and unbending. The Earth, stripped from the Sun's influence, moves into the dark on a ballistic course toward nothing. It is not frozen. The internal heat of the planet still exists. The atmosphere still exists, at least for a matter of weeks. The oceans are still liquid, but the planet is alone in a way that has no precedent. Without the Sun's radiation, atmospheric temperatures will begin to drop. But this thermal process is irrelevant because the Earth has approximately 30 minutes of existence remaining as a coherent body. The solar system is not destroyed, it is deleted as a structural category. The planets exist, but the concept of a solar system, a gravitationally organized hierarchy with a central star and orbiting bodies, has been terminated. What remains are isolated masses on diverging straight-line paths through expanding space. They will never interact again. They will never be gravitationally captured by anything. They are simply debris in free fall away from every other piece of debris in the universe. From the failure of solar gravity to the failure of the forces that hold solid matter together is a compression of scale by many orders of magnitude. The phantom expansion, which 60 million years ago was operating at the scale of galaxies, which 3 months ago was operating at the scale of planetary orbits, is now operating at the scale of planetary bodies themselves. The same mechanism, a different threshold, a different force being overwhelmed. 30 minutes before the terminal singularity, the expansion of space at the scale of a planet's radius, approximately 6,000 kilometers for the Earth, exceeds the combined electromagnetic and gravitational forces that maintain the planet's structural integrity. The Earth cannot hold its shape. The planet is not struck by anything. There is no impact. There is no heat source. The crust does not crack because of tectonic activity or thermal expansion. It cracks because the space within it is being stretched. The electromagnetic bonds between mineral crystals, the molecular cohesion of rock, the pressure gradients of the mantle, all of these are being pulled apart by the expansion of the substrate in which they exist. Fissures open in the crust, not along fault lines, but everywhere simultaneously. The mantle material beneath, no longer contained by the structural integrity of the overlying rock, responds to the reduction in pressure by decompression. It expands, it boils, it vents through the fractures in the crust in cascades of superheated silicate material that are immediately dispersed into the vacuum. Because the atmosphere has already been stripped, because electromagnetic forces at the scale of an atmospheric column, the intermolecular forces that give a gas its pressure, have also been compromised. The planet does not explode outward from a central point. It is pulled apart from every point simultaneously. The interior and exterior undergo the same process at the same time. The core, the iron-nickel ball at the planet's center, held under enormous pressure by the weight of the overlying rock, is suddenly no longer confined. The pressure from above dissipates as the overlying material disperses. The core expands. The magnetic field generated by the motion of liquid metal in the outer core collapses. The dipole structure that has protected the surface from solar radiation for billions of years simply ceases to exist, though this is irrelevant because there is no longer a surface and the sun is no longer present. What remains of the Earth 30 minutes after the initiation of planetary rupture is a cloud of material, rock fragments, metal droplets, silicate vapors, organic compounds reduced to their constituent molecules. This cloud is itself expanding, not because of any explosive release of energy, but because the space within it is expanding. The debris separates. Each fragment drifts away from every other fragment. The cloud becomes diffuse. The structure of a planet, the differentiated, layered, gravitationally organized, electromagnetically cohesive body that formed from a protoplanetary disk 4.5 billion years ago, is gone. It does not collapse into something smaller. It disperses into something larger and increasingly dilute. There is no sound. Vacuum does not carry pressure waves. There is no light beyond whatever thermal radiation the dispersing material emits as it cools. There is no observer. Biological systems ceased to function long before this stage, not as a result of any single catastrophic event, but as a result of the cumulative breakdown of the physical conditions that life requires. The Earth is not destroyed with any particular drama. It is simply reduced to a statistical distribution of particles in expanding space. The cascade is nearly complete. What remains of the universe, dispersed clouds of molecules and atoms, the detritus of billions of years of stellar nucleosynthesis, is subject to the same process that dismantled galaxies, planetary systems, and planets. But the scale has compressed to the smallest physically meaningful lengths. The phantom expansion is now operating at the femtometer scale, the scale of atomic nuclei. At 10 to the power of -19 seconds before the terminal singularity, a time interval so short that it has no human analog, that is smaller than the time it takes light to cross a proton, the strong nuclear force fails. The strong nuclear force is the most powerful of the four fundamental forces. It is what binds quarks together into protons and neutrons, and what binds protons and neutrons together into atomic nuclei. Its strength is approximately 100 times that of the electromagnetic force at nuclear scales. It is what makes nuclear weapons possible. It is what makes matter, as we understand it, stable. And it operates at the scale of approximately 1 femtometer, 1/4,000,000th of a meter. When the phantom expansion reaches femtometer scales with sufficient intensity to overcome the strong force, atomic nuclei are physically pulled apart, not by a nuclear reaction, not by a high-energy collision, by the expansion of the space within them. The protons and neutrons that had been bound together by the exchange of gluons, the mediating particles of the strong force, are separated. The gluon field stretches. At some critical separation, the energy stored in the stretched gluon field is sufficient to spontaneously produce new quark-antiquark pairs, which recombine into new particles. But at this point in the terminal sequence, the expansion rate is so high that even this process cannot keep pace. The distance between quarks grows faster than the strong force can respond. The quarks are deconfined. Quarks, under normal conditions in the observable universe, do not exist as free particles. The property called color confinement ensures that quarks are always found in bound states, as protons, neutrons, or other hadrons. Free quarks have never been observed under any experimental condition. But the Big Rip does not care about confinement. It does not care about the QCD vacuum structure. It does not care about the mechanisms by which the universe organizes itself into stable particles. It tears the quarks apart because it tears everything apart. It operates at whatever scale it needs to operate at. It is indifferent to the hierarchy of forces. It simply waits until the expansion at a given scale exceeds the binding energy at that scale. Then it proceeds. At this stage, the quarks and gluons that constituted all the hadrons in the universe are free in a rapidly expanding plasma. This plasma is not stable. It cannot condense back into hadrons because the expansion rate prevents any two quarks from approaching each other closely enough to interact via the strong force. The plasma is diluting faster than it can interact. The quarks drift apart, and then the expansion of the space between any two quarks becomes so rapid that even the concept of a distance between them loses operational meaning. The atoms that constituted the Earth, the Sun, the Milky Way, every organism that ever metabolized, every mineral that ever crystallized, every photon that ever carried energy between any 2 points, all of it, at this precise moment in the destruction sequence, ceases to exist as organized matter. The periodic table is abolished. The concept of an element is abolished. The concept of a nucleus is abolished. Matter, in the form that has been present in this universe since the first 3 minutes after the Big Bang, is physically outlawed by the expansion of the space it occupies. This is not death by heat. It is not death by cold. It is not death by any of the processes that biology, chemistry, or even astrophysics conventionally describe as destructive. It is annihilation by geometry. The terminal singularity. At T0, the scale factor of the universe reaches infinity. The expansion rate reaches infinity. The distance between any 2 points in space, any 2 points, regardless of scale, regardless of proximity, becomes infinite simultaneously. This is not a sequential process. It is instantaneous in the mathematical sense. At T0, every separation in the universe becomes infinite. The language of physics struggles here, not because the mathematics fail, the equations are internally consistent, but because the physical interpretation of the mathematics leads to conclusions that cannot be translated into any observational framework. There is no observer. There is no physical process that continues. There is no reference frame from which the singularity can be described. Space-time itself loses its differentiable structure. General relativity, the theory that has successfully described the behavior of space-time from the Planck scale to the cosmological scale, requires that space-time be a smooth, continuous manifold. At T0, this condition fails. The manifold is shredded. The concept of a metric, the mathematical object that defines distance, duration, and the causal structure of space-time, breaks down. There is no longer a meaningful way to ask how far apart any two things are, because the concept of distance requires a space-time manifold to be defined on, and the manifold no longer exists in any coherent form. The laws of physics are not broken at T0. A law of physics is a relationship between physical quantities expressed in a mathematical framework that requires space-time to be well-defined. At T0, the framework itself ceases. The laws do not break, they become inapplicable. There is nothing for them to apply to. There is no substrate on which any physical process can occur. There is no distance, there is no time, there is no causality. Causality requires that a cause precede its effect in time. Time requires a metric structure on space-time. A metric structure requires a space-time manifold. The manifold is gone. Causality does not fail at T0. It simply has nothing to organize. The chain of cause and effect that extends from the first moments after the Big Bang through stellar nucleosynthesis, planetary formation, the emergence of biological chemistry, the development of measurement and observation and theory, terminates, not because it reaches a final cause, but because the medium in which causal chains propagate has been destroyed. This is not the end of the universe in the sense that something new comes after it. It is not a transition to a new state. It is not a phase change. There is no subsequent quantum vacuum state. There is no residual curvature. There is no remnant topology. There is nothing that could serve as an initial condition for any subsequent physical process, because there is no space in which an initial condition could exist,
and no time in which a physical process could develop. The Big Rip is not an event in space-time. It is the termination of space-time. It is the last entry in the causal record of a universe that began approximately 13.8 billion years ago as a singularity of infinite density and will end as a singularity of infinite separation.
There is no aftermath. This is the precise clinical statement that terminates the analysis. An aftermath requires time. Time requires space-time. Space-time does not survive T0. There is no post-rip era in which the consequences of the Big Rip play out. There is no cold remnant. There is no radiation field. There is no quantum vacuum state oscillating between configurations. There is nothing in which anything could be. Nothing is not a substance. It is the absence of any substrate in which substance could be defined. There is also no observer. This is not a secondary consideration. It is a foundational constraint on the analysis. The entire forensic record of the terminal sequence, the galactic dissolution, the solar disconnection, the planetary rupture, the subatomic erasure, the final singularity, is constructed from the mathematics of physical models extrapolated forward through the destruction sequence in a universe where all observers have long since ceased to function. No consciousness, biological or technological, survives to T0. No measurement is taken, no data is recorded. The destruction sequence is unwitnessed from within and unwitnessable from without, because there is no outside from which the final singularity can be observed. The universe under the phantom energy scenario is not a tragedy. Tragedy requires a subject who suffers a loss. It requires an agent who experiences the end as an end. The universe has no such subject at T0. It has no experience. It has no loss. It simply ceases to be a physical system. The cessation is complete. It is not partial. It is not gradual at T0. It is absolute. What the phantom energy scenario reveals, if it is the correct model, is that the universe is not a permanent structure. This should not be surprising, and yet the cognitive resistance to this conclusion is persistent in human thinking about cosmology. The universe is old, approximately 13.8 billion years. It contains approximately 2 trillion galaxies. It operates according to precise mathematical laws that have not detectably varied across the entire observable history of spacetime. It exhibits, in other words, every surface characteristic of permanence. But permanence is not a property that can be read from surface characteristics. Permanence requires that the underlying forces and parameters that maintain stability remain stable indefinitely. If phantom energy exists, they do not. The equation of state parameter W is less than -1, and therefore the stability of every structure in the universe, from superclusters to quarks, has an expiration date. Reality, under this model, is a temporary condition. Not temporary in the sense of lasting a finite time but being replaced by something else. Temporary in the sense of lasting a finite time and then not being replaced by anything at all. The universe is a physical system that exists, operates, and then terminates. The termination is total. There is no continuation. There is no transformation. There is no conservation of anything beyond the moment of the final singularity, because conservation laws require space-time to be defined, and it will not be. The atoms in a human body are, at this moment, moving through space at velocities determined by temperature and intermolecular interactions. They are not stationary. They have never been stationary. The matter of which they are composed has been through stellar cores, supernova shockwaves, interstellar medium, planetary accretion, geological cycling, and biological metabolism before arriving in their current configuration. It will continue to cycle. It will be exhaled, metabolized, dissolved, incorporated into other organisms, oxidized, reduced, buried, released. The atoms will persist. The configuration will change. But the atoms themselves, the protons, the neutrons, the electrons, are not permanent. They exist within a space-time that is itself not permanent. They are maintained by forces that are, if phantom energy is real, on a countdown. The strong nuclear force that confines the quarks in a proton is scheduled for termination. The electromagnetic force that organizes electrons into shells around nuclei is scheduled for termination. The space-time manifold that gives those electrons and protons a position, a velocity, a causal history, is scheduled for termination. You are not moving through space. Space is moving through you, and eventually, it will not leave a single atom intact.